The history of our world is written not in ink, but in silence. The grandest, most terrifying truths are not found in royal decrees or victory steels, but in the gaps between them, in the stories so horrifying they were deemed unwritable, passed down only in the terrified whispers that survive millennia. No story exemplifies this more than that of the Lunanim, the people of the Silver Face, and their dread moon temple. For centuries, it was a legend, a ghost story archaeologists used to scare interns around campfires. Then we found it, and the moment my trowel scraped against the first obsidian slab, I realized the ghost stories were not stories at all. They were warnings, what we deciphered from the carvings in that accursed place. The fate of the young women offered to the pale god is a secret that has cost good men their sanity and their lives. It is a truth that proves some knowledge is a poison, and that the ancient world harbored shadows so deep, so fundamentally wrong, that to look into them is to see the universe itself recoil. Part 1. The Whisper in the Stone. My name is Dr. Aristhorn, and I have spent my life chasing whispers. As a professor of pre-axial archaeology at the University of Chicago, my specialty was occultic practices of forgotten Anatolian civilizations. For 20 years, I was a leading voice dismissing the Lunanim as a mythological construct, a bogeyman invented by rival city-states to explain away missing livestock, and occasionally missing daughters. The primary sources were laughably thin. A Hittite cursed tablet mentioning the pale thieves of the high places, a fragmentary Ugaritic poem warning maidens to shun the silver gaze at walks by night. It was the stuff of folklore, not history. The discovery that unmade my career and my reality began with a landslide. An unseasonably wet spring in the remote Taurus Mountains of southeastern Turkey triggered a massive erosion event, exposing a geological formation that was anything but natural. Satellite imagery revealed a perfect, terrifying geometry, a crescent-shaped aperture carved into the heart of a granite peak, facing the sky. It was my former mentor, the brilliant and reckless Dr. Silas Crow, who secured the funding and the permits. Eris, they're real, he'd hissed over a crackling satellite phone, and I found their front door. The site was inaccessible by any modern means. We reached it by mule and by foot, a week-long trek into a landscape that felt actively hostile. The air was thin and cold. The silence, so profound it felt like a physical pressure. The front door was a crescent aperture, a gateway 50 feet high, carved from a single, veined piece of obsidian that shone with sickly, internal luminescence under the full moon. It was not a door to be opened. It was a mouth. The initial excavations were electrifying. We found no weapons, no cooking pots, no signs of daily life. This was not a city. It was a temple, and its only purpose was ritual. The walls of the entrance corridor were covered in bas-reliefs of exquisite, nauseating detail. They depicted a procession, priests with elongated, hairless skulls and robes of what appeared to be woven moonlight, leading chains of young women. The girls were always shown with downcast eyes, their hands bound by vines of silver. They were beautiful, diverse, captives from a dozen different cultures, their distinct features meticulously recorded by the ancient artists. Their fate, however, was not immediately clear. The carvings showed them being led into the temple. Then, nothing. The narrative stopped. It was as if they simply vanished from the material world. We found the first of the whisper stones in a sealed antechamber. They were small, polished discs of a resonant crystal, and when held to the ear in the absolute silence of the temple, they emitted a low, rhythmic hum. At first, we thought it was a natural geological phenomenon. Then, linguist Dr. Alara Vance, after weeks of cross-referencing the few known Lunanim glyphs with Proto-Hadean and Hurrian, made the breakthrough. The hum wasn't random. It was a carrier wave. The subtle variations in pitch and pulse, when filtered through her specialized software, resolved into a phonemic language. The whisper stones were not artifacts. They were records. The first one we fully translated was a log of a high priest, a being who called himself Kalen. His voice, recreated by a synthetic speaker, was a dry, emotionless rasp that echoed in our sterile lab tent. The seventh moon of the Lord's hunger. The offerings from the coastal people are adequate. Their fear is a potent vintage. The convergence approaches. The veil thins. The chosen vessel, designated Lyra, has been prepared. Her resonance is pure, her spirit untainted by the sun's vulgar glare. She will be the gate. She will be the song. The Lord will drink the silence between her heartbeats and walk in her skin. We stared at each other, the 5 of us in that tent, the air suddenly frigid. This was not a simple sacrifice. This was not a drowning, a burning, or a bloodletting. The language was ontological. It spoke of hunger, of vessels, of walking in skin. It spoke of a Lord who was not a metaphor, but a presence. The terror began subtly. One of our grad students, a young man named Ben, who had been tasked with cataloging the Whisper Stones, started suffering from night terrors. He claimed to see a tall, pale man standing at the foot of his cot, a man whose face was a perfect, featureless oval of silver. He was sent down the mountain, diagnosed with acute altitude sickness and sleep paralysis. We dismissed it. Then the animals fled. The mountain goats that had been a constant, skittish presence vanished. The birds stopped singing. The silence around the temple deepened, becoming a vacuum that seemed to suck the sound from our very voices. The breakthrough, the one that revealed the full, grotesque scope of their purpose, came from the deepest chamber we had yet uncovered, the sanctorum. It was a circular room, its domed ceiling a perfect map of the night sky, crafted from inlaid lapis lazuli and polished quartz. In the center of the room was not an altar, but a chair. It was carved from the same luminous obsidian as the gateway, a complex, terrifying contraption of restraints, crystal filaments, and channels that drained into a central silver basin. The walls of the sanctorum were covered not in carvings, but in texts, the final testament of the Lunanim. It was here we learned the true name of their god, the sleeper in the sky. It was not the moon itself, but something that lived behind it, something that used the moon as a lens, a focal point for its consciousness. The Lunanim were not worshippers. They were technicians, a priesthood that maintained a cosmic engine. Their god was not a spiritual entity, but a parasitic intelligence from a reality adjacent to our own, a being of pure consciousness that hungered for one thing our world possessed in abundance: temporal experience, the raw, vivid, fleeting sensation of being alive. And the captured virgins? They were not sacrifices in the traditional sense. They were batteries. They were fuel. Their youth, their vitality, their untapped potential for life, their very chronal resonance, was a most potent source of experiential energy. The temple was a harvesting machine. The chair was the interface. Ilera translated the central inscription above the chair, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. Here, the song is severed. Here, the vessel is emptied. Here, the silence is fed. We had found the killing floor, but we still didn't understand the mechanism. How did they harvest a life? What did it mean to drink the silence between heartbeats? The answer, the final, soul-shattering piece of the puzzle, was waiting for us in the darkest corner of the sanctorum. A single, final whisper stone, clutched in the skeletal, petrified hand of the last high priest. It was his confession, his epitaph, and our damnation. The final whisper stone required a new decryption key. The language became more complex, layered with mathematical and metaphysical concepts that pushed Ilera to the brink of exhaustion. When she finally played the translation, we sat in the sanctorum, the cold from the obsidian chair leaching into our bones. Kalen's rasping voice filled the sacred silence he had described. I, Kalen, last voice of Silverface, make this record in the waning of our power. The sun-cursed tribes grow bold. Their numbers swell. The pure vessels grow scarce. The Lord's hunger is a constant, a pressure in the mind that drives men mad. I record now the sacred liturgy of unmaking, so that should we fall, the truth will not be lost to the void. He then described, in clinical, horrifying detail, the process. It was not a ritual of blood, but of time. The chosen maiden, the vessel, was prepared for days with psychoactive herbs and sonic conditioning, her mind opened and her life force made resonant. On the night of the lunar convergence, when the veil between our world and the sleepers was at its thinnest, she was led to the sanctorum. She was secured in the chair. The crystal filaments, which we had assumed were decorative, were actually conduits. They were placed against her temples, her throat, over her heart. Then the priest began the chant of unraveling. It was not a song of words, but precise, destructive frequencies that resonated with the victim's very life stream. The chant finds the song of the vessel's being, Kalen explained, his voice devoid of any empathy. It is a unique frequency, the music of her accumulated experience, her memories, her hopes, her fears, the totality of her temporal existence. The chant does not simply kill her. It inverts her. It plays her life backward, from the moment of her capture to her first breath, at an accelerated, exponential rate. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the chair, and my mind's eye conjured the scene. A young woman, her eyes wide with a terror beyond comprehension, as her own life is ripped from her not as a future denied, but as a past undone. She wouldn't feel pain in the conventional sense. She would feel her very self unraveling. The vessel experiences the unmaking of her identity. The whisper stone continued. She forgets her name, her language, the faces of her parents. She feels her joys turn to ash, her sorrows evaporate. She is reduced, moment by moment, memory by memory, to the primal state of infancy, and then further, to the silence that preceded her conception. This process of experiential annihilation is what the Lord consumes. It is the ultimate sustenance, the taste of a consciousness being erased. The silver basin beneath the chair was not for blood. It was to catch the chronal effluent, the psychic residue of this unraveling, a silvery, viscous substance that was the physical manifestation of a stolen life. The Lunanim priests used this substance in their own rituals to prolong their lives, becoming ageless, hollow men sustained by the stolen time of others. They were not just murderers. They were cosmic vampires, feeding on the very history of a human soul. This was why the fate of the virgins terrified historians. It wasn't just the brutality of a violent death. It was the ontological violence. It was the idea of a death that reached back through time and negated a life, turning a vibrant, feeling human being into a blank slate, a zero. It was a crime against existence itself. The record ended with Kalen's final, grim note. The process is not without risk. The vessel's song, in its final moment of severance, can sometimes echo. It can imprint on the sanctorum, on the priests, even on the Lord himself. These echoes are ghosts of ghosts, fragments of unmade lives that cling to the edges of reality. They are the source of the pale watchers some of the younger acolytes report seeing. They are nothing. They are less than nothing. They are the silence that was once a song. The pale watcher. Ben's description. It wasn't a hallucination. It was an echo, a psychic scar left by one of the countless unmade women. The discovery paralyzed our team. The sheer, cosmic horror of it was too vast a process. We had come seeking knowledge and found a metaphysical abattoir. Silas, ever pragmatist, argued for secrecy. This knowledge is a weapon, Eris, he'd whispered, his eyes wild. It's a key to powers we can't even comprehend. We can't let this fall into the hands of bureaucrats and politicians. But the temple was not done with us. The deeper we delved into its secrets, the more it seemed to become aware of our presence. Equipment began to fail. Batteries drained in minutes. Digital recordings played back as garbled, screaming static. And the silence began to feel intentional. A predatory stillness. It was Alara who broke first. She started spending long hours alone in the sanctorum, trying to commune with the echoes. As she put it, she claimed she could hear them. The faint, fading whispers of the unmade, a chorus of lost girls pleading for someone to remember their names. Her health deteriorated rapidly. She stopped sleeping, her hands shook constantly, and she developed a photophobia so severe she wore sunglasses even inside the darkened tents. The end of the day came on the night of the full moon, the same lunar phase the Lunanim had used for their convergences. The atmosphere at the camp was thick, with a dread we could all feel, but none would name. Alara was gone from her tent. A frantic search led us to the one place we should have checked first, the one place we had all been subconsciously avoiding, the sanctorum. We found her there, sitting in the obsidian chair. She wasn't restrained. She was perfectly still, her head tilted back, her eyes wide open and fixed on the star-mapped ceiling. She was humming, a low, discordant, and yet hauntingly familiar tune. It was the same fundamental frequency as the whisper stones, but twisted, corrupted. Alara, I shouted, my voice swallowed by the room's acoustics. She slowly turned her head toward us. A serene, empty smile played on her lips, but her eyes were pools of pure terror. It was as if her conscious mind was screaming from a prison deep inside her own body. "The song is so beautiful, heiress," she whispered, her voice a dual-tone horror. Her own layered with that dry, rasping priestly cadence we knew from recordings. "The vessel is ready. The Lord is hungry." Then the temperature in the sanctorum plummeted. The faint, internal luminescence of the obsidian gateway, and the chair flared into a sickly, brilliant silver. And from the shadows in the corner of the room, a figure emerged. It was tall, impossibly so, and thin. Its form seemed to be made of solidified moonlight, a pale, shimmering outline of a man. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, just as Ben had described. The Pale Watcher. It took a step toward the chair, toward Alara. Silas screamed and raised his rock hammer, a futile, pathetic gesture against this echo of an ancient horror. As he did, the figure turned its blank face toward him. It didn't have eyes, but we all felt its gaze, a sensation of absolute cold, of nullity. Silas froze, his mouth open in a silent scream, a rime of frost instantly forming on his beard and jacket. I acted on an instinct I didn't know I possessed. I didn't charge the thing. I ran to Alara, grabbed her, and physically dragged her out of the chair. The moment her body left the obsidian, the silver light died. The crushing cold vanished. The Pale Watcher was gone. But the silence it left behind was more terrifying than its presence. We had not just uncovered a history. We had disturbed a slumber machine, and we had become part of its terrible, ongoing story. We abandoned the temple at first light. There were no arguments, no debates. We were a group of shattered people, fleeing a truth that had become a predator. Alara was catatonic, requiring two of our strongest porters to carry her down the mountain on a stretcher. Silas never spoke again. He stared into middle distance, his body racked with tremors, his mind broken by the Watcher's gaze. He was institutionalized within a month of our return and took his own life a year later, leaving a note that contained only a single neatly written phrase: "The silence is hungry." Officially, the dig was shut down due to unstable geological conditions and unforeseen health issues among the senior staff. Our funding was pulled, our findings were classified and buried in the vaults of a dozen wary governments and private institutions. The story we told was a palatable lie, but the truth, the terrible, echoing truth of the Moon Temple, did not die. It had infected us. I took an indefinite leave from the university. I couldn't stand the fluorescent lights of a classroom, the chatter of students, the mundane certainty of a world that believed history was a closed book. I saw the sanctorum every time I closed my eyes. I heard the hum of the whisper stones in the quiet of my apartment. I was a historian who had discovered a history that was still alive and still hungry. The first sign that it had followed me home was the dream. I was back in the sanctorum, but I was in the chair. I felt the cold obsidian against my skin, saw the crystal filaments snaking toward my temples, and I heard it, a chant vast and ancient that began to pull at the seams of my being. I felt memories begin to slip away. The face of my first love, the sound of my mother's voice, the title of my doctoral dissertation. I was being unmade. I woke up screaming, my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of silver on my tongue. Then I saw him, just a flicker, at the edge of my vision, reflected in a window as I walked down a busy Chicago street at dusk. A tall, pale man in anachronistic robes, his face a smooth, silver blank. The Pale Watcher. It was no longer confined to the temple. Our intrusion, our meddling, had created a link. We had carried the echo out with us, like a spiritual pathogen. I contacted the other survivors. Their stories were the same. Ben, the grad student, was living in a remote cabin in Montana, surrounded by charms and sigils he'd invented to ward off the silence. He sent me rambling, handwritten letters describing how the stars outside his windows sometimes rearranged themselves into the lunanim star map. Another researcher, a geologist named Maria, had quit her job and joined a cloistered convent, seeking refuge in a different kind of ritual, a different kind of silence. Alara Vance was the most changed. She recovered her physical health, but her mind had been permanently altered. She could no longer work as a linguist. Ancient languages now triggered paralyzing fugue states. She had become an artist, producing thousands of sketches of the same thing, a young woman's face. But each drawing was different. Different ethnicities, different features, different expressions of fear, resignation, or serene emptiness. She was drawn to vessels, the unmade. She was trying to give them back their faces, to remember the names the Lunanim had stolen. It's the only thing that keeps it at bay, Eris, she told me during one of my visits, her hands stained with charcoal. The unmaking requires forgetting, so remembrance is our only weapon. They wanted to reduce them to silence. We must be their echo. Her words became my mission. I could not publish my findings. No reputable journal would touch them, and to release them to the world would be to unleash a panic, and worse, to potentially attract the attention of the wrong kind of people, those who, like Silas initially, might see the Lunanim's techniques not as a horror, but as a power to be harnessed. So, I fight my war in the shadows. I spend my days and my family's money tracking down folk tales and archaeological reports that hint at other sites, other temples built by the Lunanim or similar cults across the globe. I cross-reference missing persons reports with lunar cycles, looking for patterns that should not exist. I have become a historian of the unseen, a cartographer of terror, and I am always watching. I avoid mirrors at night. I dread the coming of the full moon, when the veil is thin and the hum of the whisper stone seems loudest in my mind. I know, with a certainty that is colder than the temple's obsidian, that the sleeper in the sky is not dead. It is a patient intelligence, and its hunger is eternal. The Lunanim priesthood may be dust, but their machine, their ritual, their purpose, is a wound in the fabric of the world that is never healed. What the ancient priests did to captured virgins inside the moon temple was not merely a sacrifice. It was an unraveling of the human soul, a feast for a god that consumes time itself. And the reason it still terrifies historians like me is not just because of its grotesque cruelty, but because we now understand that history is not a safe, petrified thing. It is a living, breathing entity, and some of its chapters are still being written. Some of its monsters are not yet finished with us. The true terror is the realization that the past is not even past. It is waiting in the silence behind the moon, and it is always, always hungry.